The year was somewhere in the late 14th century, in the heart of Northern Europe, where winter arrived not gradually, but with sudden, ruthless cruelty. Snow blanketed the forests and fields for months on end, often leaving only the tallest trees and the steepest hills visible above a sea of white. The rivers froze over, turning once bustling trade routes into icy barriers, while the wind cut across the landscape like 1,000 invisible knives. Villages, though scattered and small, had to endure these merciless months with nothing but human ingenuity, community cooperation, and the resources immediately available to them. Life in the medieval North was harsh, a daily struggle against the elements. And yet, within this struggle, people developed a remarkable mastery over their environment, transforming the cold and the dark into spaces of warmth, shelter, and even beauty. Medieval homes were the first line of defense against winter's severity. These structures were never merely utilitarian. They represented a careful balance between available resources, local climate, and social structures. In the peasant village, houses were small, often single-room dwellings constructed from wattle and daub, sticks woven together and coated with a mixture of mud, clay, straw, and animal dung. While this combination might seem crude by modern standards, its insulating properties were exceptional. The thick walls, sometimes reinforced with timber frames, could retain heat from the hearth for long hours. The roofs were almost always thatched, made of straw, reeds, or occasionally heather, meticulously layered to trap air and shed snow. This technique not only prevented water infiltration, but also created a buffer of warmth between the cold outside and the family living inside. Inside these humble abodes, life was organized around the hearth. The hearth was more than just a fireplace. It was the literal and figurative center of existence. In winter, it was both the kitchen and the primary source of heat. Smoke from the fire was carefully managed, rising through an opening in the roof or a primitive chimney, and the fire itself was kept burning day and night. Families would use wood, dried peat, or even coal where available. The design of the house ensured that heat radiated through the single room, where beds, benches, and storage were all strategically placed to benefit from the warmth. People slept on raised platforms or simple wooden frames, covered with furs, wool blankets, and straw mattresses. Beds were often positioned close to the hearth so that even during the coldest nights, at least one side would remain comfortably warm. Tapestries and thick curtains were not a luxury, but a necessity. They were hung on walls to prevent drafts and retain precious heat within the room. In wealthier households, these tapestries depicted biblical stories, heraldic symbols, or pastoral scenes, doubling as both insulation and decoration. In peasant homes, simpler cloths and furs served the same purpose, creating pockets of warmth that were essential for survival. Every inch of the living space was optimized. Even the doors were fitted with cloth or straw to block cold drafts. And the floors were covered with rushes or straw to provide insulation against the freezing ground. Animals played a crucial role in medieval winter survival. In many households, livestock were not entirely separated from living spaces. Smaller animals, such as chickens and pigs, might be kept in a small partitioned area inside the house, not only for security and convenience, but also for the warmth they provided. Larger animals, like cows or goats, were usually housed in a connected barn or lower level. The heat from these animals would rise, warming the floors and walls of the dwelling above. This symbiotic relationship between humans and animals demonstrates the pragmatic ingenuity of medieval life, where every available source of warmth was leveraged to create a livable environment. Clothing was another critical adaptation. Medieval winter attire was layered, heavy, and primarily made of wool and fur. Linen undergarments provided a basic layer, while outer layers of wool cloaks, tunics, and hose provided insulation. Fur, often from the family's own livestock or acquired through hunting, was highly valued for its warmth. Hats, mittens, and boots were essential, especially for children who spent long hours outdoors tending animals, fetching water, or chopping firewood. Even indoors, these garments were worn throughout the day in the coldest periods, only removed when tending to the hearth or sleeping under multiple layers of blankets. Food preservation and preparation were deeply intertwined with winter survival. Medieval winters demanded foresight in both storing and cooking sustenance. Villagers would begin preparations well before the first frost, harvesting and drying grains, smoking or salting meats, and fermenting vegetables to last through the months when fresh produce was unavailable. Hearths were used not only for warmth, but for slow cooking, boiling stews, and baking bread, which would provide energy and comfort during long, dark evenings. The smells of cooking, boiling barley, roasting meats, and simmering soups permeated every corner of the home, creating a sense of security and normalcy amidst the harsh external conditions. Communities also played an essential role in winter survival. Villages were tightly knit, and people relied on one another for labor, protection, and trade. Woodcutting, hay collection, and food preparation often required collective effort. Neighbors shared firewood, aided in tending to animals, and exchanged preserved food, ensuring that no household suffered alone. During extreme snowstorms or severe frost, villagers would huddle together in the largest house, church, or communal hall, where central hearths could support multiple families. This cooperative spirit was not only practical, but vital for mental and social well-being, mitigating the isolation and hardships imposed by the long winters. Architecture in wealthier towns and castles reflected an even more sophisticated understanding of winter survival. Stone walls, sometimes several feet thick, absorbed and retained heat, while small windows minimized heat loss. Floors were often raised and covered with wooden planks or rushes, and chimneys allowed smoke to escape while maintaining a controlled heat flow. Tiled stoves, a luxury in Northern Europe, were designed to radiate warmth slowly and efficiently over many hours, allowing rooms to remain comfortably warm without constant attention. Nobles and merchants could afford multiple rooms, with sleeping chambers strategically positioned near the warmest areas, such as above kitchens or near fireplaces, while servants and lower status occupants stayed in adjacent rooms where heat trickled down. Beyond the physical structures, medieval people employed psychological and cultural adaptations to endure the cold. Winter was a time of storytelling, music, and communal gatherings around the fire. Tales of heroic knights, saints, or local legends provided entertainment, moral lessons, and a sense of continuity, reminding families that, like every winter, hardship would eventually give way to spring. Religious observances, feasts, and festivals punctuated the darkest months, providing not only spiritual comfort but also opportunities for social interaction, trade, and the sharing of warmth, both literal and metaphorical. In essence, the medieval approach to winter survival was a multifaceted strategy combining architecture, material culture, community, and personal resourcefulness. It was an intricate choreography of using every available tool and technique to maintain warmth, nutrition, and morale. Despite the apparent simplicity of the homes, they were marvels of environmental adaptation, optimized for the harsh realities of Northern European winters. Every stone, beam, straw layer, and hearth fire was deliberately chosen to counteract the elements. Every tapestry, fur blanket, and woolen garment was not mere ornamentation, but a functional part of the survival toolkit. Through these practices, medieval people demonstrated resilience, creativity, and a profound understanding of their environment. Life in a frozen village was far from easy, yet within these homes, families found warmth, sustenance, and continuity. They transformed the unforgiving winter into a season of endurance, community, and adaptation. By integrating architecture, domestic labor, animal husbandry, clothing, and social cohesion, they created environments that allowed them not just to survive, but to persist with a measure of comfort and dignity against the relentless cold. This scene closes with the image of a small medieval house as snow swirls relentlessly outside. Inside, a family sits around the fire, a mother stirring a pot of thick barley stew, children huddled under furs, an elderly man telling stories of past winters, and the dog sleeping contentedly near the hearth. Smoke curls through the simple chimney, furs line the walls, and a sense of quiet endurance fills the air. It is a moment that encapsulates the medieval struggle against winter, raw, challenging, but met with ingenuity, community, and an unyielding human spirit. As winter deepened, the rhythm of medieval life shifted to adapt to the limitations imposed by long nights, heavy snowfalls, and relentless cold. Villages that had once thrived on outdoor labor, farming, and foraging now turned inward, and the very structure of daily life reflected the necessity of conserving warmth, maintaining sustenance, and preserving both physical and mental health. The medieval calendar itself was intimately tied to the seasons, and winter marked a distinct chapter in the life of the village, defined by rituals, communal responsibilities, and strategies for survival. Food preservation was one of the most critical aspects of enduring the winter months. Unlike modern societies where refrigeration is taken for granted, medieval communities relied on a combination of environmental conditions, chemical techniques, and meticulous planning to ensure survival. Prior to the first frost, villagers engaged in what we would now recognize as an intensive period of harvest preparation. Crops such as barley, rye, oats, and wheat were threshed, dried, and stored in granaries, often elevated to prevent dampness and rodent infestations. Vegetables like cabbage, turnips, and root vegetables were either stored in underground pits lined with straw and clay, or pickled in brine or vinegar to last through the darkest months. Fruits were dried or turned into preserves, while berries were stored in cool cellars, carefully wrapped in straw or cloth to prevent spoilage. Meat preservation was equally sophisticated. Livestock were slaughtered at the onset of winter when food resources dwindled and animals could no longer be sustained easily. Methods such as smoking, salting, and curing were widely used. Smoking hams, bacon, and sausages over slow, aromatic fires infused them with flavor while simultaneously inhibiting bacterial growth. Salted meats were packed in barrels, often layered with herbs, and stored in cellars or cool rooms. In coastal or riverine communities, fish was salted, smoked, or dried, providing a crucial source of protein during periods when fresh meat was unavailable. The preparation of food was a communal event. Entire families, and sometimes multiple neighbors, would participate in butchering, smoking, and storing meat, turning necessity into social collaboration. Water management was another essential skill during winter. Wells often froze over, and villagers developed techniques to access drinking water safely. Ice layers on ponds or streams were broken carefully to retrieve fresh water, or snow was collected, melted, and filtered for consumption. Storage of water near the hearth or in insulated vessels prevented freezing, ensuring that cooking and hydration could continue uninterrupted. In regions prone to extreme cold, water was rationed carefully, emphasizing both conservation and hygiene, a subtle understanding of environmental adaptation that was critical to survival. Work routines in winter were significantly modified. The agricultural cycle dictated the rhythm of labor. Fields lay dormant, livestock required daily tending, and maintenance of the home became a priority. Chopping and storing firewood dominated daily tasks, with villagers ensuring that sufficient supplies were on hand for both heating and cooking. Snow removal from roofs, pathways, and livestock areas was a vital activity to prevent structural collapse or injury. Tools themselves required care. Metal implements were protected from moisture and rust, while wooden handles were oiled or stored indoors. Winter labor was not absent, but it was adapted to minimize exposure and maximize efficiency, reflecting a pragmatic understanding of the dangers posed by the environment. Clothing and personal adaptation were intertwined with work. Layering was essential, with woolen tunics, cloaks, and hose providing insulation. Linen undergarments absorbed sweat, preventing the chilling effect of dampness. Fur-lined gloves, boots, and hats were critical, especially for children, who often assisted in gathering firewood or tending animals. For wealthier individuals, finer garments offered additional insulation, while the peasantry relied on practical combinations of multiple layers. Footwear was thick-soled and sometimes stuffed with straw to protect against icy ground, preventing frostbite, a constant threat in northern climates. Even indoors, garments were not removed entirely. A thin tunic or wool layer remained, ensuring that sudden exposure to colder areas of the house did not result in illness. Medieval winter rituals reflected both survival and cultural adaptation. Celebrations and festivals were deliberately scheduled during the harshest months, providing psychological relief and reinforcing community cohesion. Yule, the precursor to modern Christmas celebrations in Northern Europe, was observed with feasts, music, and storytelling. Homes were decorated with greenery, and fires burned long into the night, providing warmth and symbolizing light in a season dominated by darkness. Communities gathered in churches or communal halls for Mass, sharing bread, ale, and fellowship. While individual households maintained their own smaller observances, exchanging simple gifts, preserving family traditions, and reinforcing social bonds. These rituals were far more than spiritual expressions. They were adaptive behaviors that reinforced morale and social cohesion during the period of scarcity and isolation. Hunting and foraging continued, albeit adapted for winter. Forests covered in deep snow presented both challenges and opportunities. Deer, boar, and other game were pursued using specialized techniques. Snares, traps, and coordinated drives ensured that hunting remained possible despite harsh conditions. Ice fishing, common in northern regions, provided a vital protein source, with villagers drilling holes in frozen rivers or lakes to access fish. Knowledge of seasonal animal behavior was crucial. Understanding which animals burrowed, migrated, or hibernated allowed communities to plan subsistence strategies effectively. Winter survival was a combination of preparation, observation, and experience passed down through generations, often orally and supplemented with practical experimentation. Psychological adaptation was as important as physical survival. Long nights, isolation, and monotonous routines could erode morale. Storytelling, music, and games were employed to combat boredom and maintain mental health. Children learned survival skills through play and observation, absorbing knowledge about firewood management, food preparation, and clothing care while remaining engaged and entertained. Elders served as repositories of wisdom, recounting past winters, extreme storms, and successful strategies for coping with scarcity. This oral tradition reinforced cultural continuity and a sense of identity, providing both instruction and comfort. Architectural adaptations continued to reflect the harsh environment. Houses were insulated with multiple layers, including daubed walls, straw, and even moss. Roofs were steeply pitched to shed snow quickly, preventing collapse. Chimneys, when present, were engineered to optimize smoke flow while minimizing heat loss. Floors were raised to protect against cold and dampness, often layered with straw rushes or furs. Wealthier homes featured separate kitchens or warm rooms designed to concentrate heat in living areas, while servants or lower status occupants occupied adjacent, cooler rooms. The placement of furniture was deliberate, with beds, benches, and storage chests positioned to capture residual heat from hearths, stoves, or even the body heat of nearby animals. Beyond the physical adaptations, the medieval approach to winter reflected a philosophy of moderation and prudence. Resources were meticulously conserved, firewood rationed, water managed carefully, and food stored and rotated to prevent spoilage. The seasons dictated behavior, encouraging early rising during daylight hours, concentrated activity in productive periods, and rest or indoor labor during the coldest times. This synchronization with natural rhythms created a sustainable lifestyle, emphasizing foresight, community cooperation, and respect for the limits imposed by the environment. Winter was simultaneously a time of scarcity and opportunity. Scarcity in terms of resources and sunlight, opportunity in the form of reflection, skill development, and the reinforcement of social bonds. In sum, medieval winter survival was a delicate interplay between environment, architecture, food management, clothing, labor, and social structures. Each element was carefully calibrated to ensure the persistence of life through the most challenging months. Homes were not just shelters, but carefully orchestrated ecosystems, balancing heat, airflow, and human activity. Clothing was both functional and symbolic, representing layers of protection and adaptation. Community rituals and shared labor ensured that no individual faced winter alone, while storytelling, music, and festivals reinforced mental resilience. Survival was a collective enterprise, supported by centuries of accumulated knowledge, cultural norms, and pragmatic adaptation. The scene concludes with a panoramic view of a snow-covered village at dusk. Smoke curls from chimneys, Fires burn warmly within homes, and villagers emerge briefly to tend animals or fetch firewood. Children play in the snow, learning the skills they will need to survive future winters, while elders watch knowingly, passing stories to the next generation. The village is quiet yet alive, a testament to human ingenuity, perseverance, and the intricate dance between people and the natural world. In these frozen months, the medieval community transforms adversity into opportunity, darkness into warmth, and scarcity into survival, crafting lives that are simultaneously challenging, resilient, and profoundly human. As winter deepened further into the northern European landscape, the days grew shorter, and the sun barely pierced through the thick gray clouds. The cold was unrelenting. The snow piled high against the walls of homes and barns, and yet life continued with a rhythm shaped entirely by necessity and adaptation. Beyond mere survival, medieval communities found ways to embrace the season, turning what might have been months of monotony and hardship into opportunities for entertainment. Religious observance, innovation, and intimate interaction with the surrounding environment. The very essence of human resilience became visible during these months, manifesting in creativity, ingenuity, and social cohesion. Entertainment during winter was an integral part of sustaining morale. Villagers had limited daylight and almost no access to manufactured amusements, so creativity and storytelling became primary sources of amusement. Around the hearth, families and neighbors gathered to share tales passed down through generations. These stories were often richly embroidered with lessons, warnings, and allegories, serving both as moral guidance and as a way to process the challenges of daily life. Folk tales about cunning foxes, heroic knights, and wise elders provided mental stimulation and fostered a collective cultural identity. Music was another staple. Flutes, lutes, and simple percussion instruments accompanied songs that ranged from devotional hymns to playful ballads recounting village life. Even young children participated, clapping, singing, or learning to play small instruments, ensuring that entertainment also served an educational function. Religious observance took on a heightened significance during winter, reflecting both devotion and practical coping mechanisms for the darkness and cold. The church served as a spiritual, social, and occasionally physical refuge, offering warmth, community, and guidance. Major festivals, including the celebration of Christmas, Epiphany, and Saints' Days, punctuated the bleak months, providing structured intervals of festivity and reflection. Pilgrimages, though more challenging in winter, still occurred when possible, underscoring the intertwining of faith and endurance. Clergy played a vital role in community life, not only leading services, but also offering counsel, distributing alms, and organizing communal activities to maintain cohesion and morale. Rituals, whether private in the home or communal in the church, provided a predictable and comforting framework in a world dominated by uncertainty. Technological innovations during this period, while modest compared to modern standards, were remarkably effective in mitigating the challenges of winter. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons applied their skills to improve heating, storage, and protection from the elements. Chimneys, though simple in design, represented a significant advancement, improving the efficiency of smoke evacuation and enabling larger indoor fires. Stone and brickwork in wealthier homes and castles allowed for the construction of thick walls that retained heat, while specialized ovens and stoves allowed for slow, sustained cooking. Simple mechanical devices, such as treadle-powered grinding mills and pulleys for lifting firewood, reduced physical labor and exposure to extreme cold. These innovations were born not of luxury, but of necessity, a testament to human ingenuity under environmental pressure. Interaction with the natural environment remained a constant preoccupation. While snow and ice restricted mobility, they also created new opportunities. Frozen rivers and lakes allowed for temporary transportation routes, enabling trade and communication that would have been impossible in other seasons. Winter hunting required intimate knowledge of animal behavior, tracking footprints through deep snow, understanding migration patterns, and using specialized equipment to hunt efficiently and safely. Ice fishing provided sustenance in regions otherwise isolated from abundant food sources. Firewood harvesting was both a necessity and a delicate ecological practice, as villagers had to balance the need for fuel with the preservation of local forests for future seasons. The environment dictated both labor and leisure, shaping every activity from daily chores to social gatherings. Social gatherings during winter were carefully calibrated to serve multiple functions. Communal tasks, such as chopping and storing firewood, repairing homes, or tending to animals, were often carried out collectively, reducing both labor and exposure to harsh conditions. Festive gatherings, on the other hand, served to reinforce community bonds and alleviate the psychological weight of prolonged isolation. Music, storytelling, and dance were essential components, often structured around meals prepared with preserved foods. Shared labor and shared celebration were intertwined, ensuring that survival and socio-cultural continuity were mutually reinforced. Education and skill transmission during winter were subtle but pervasive. Younger members of the household learned essential skills through observation and participation. Boys and girls assisted with cooking, tended to animals, repaired garments, and maintained heating systems. Adolescents practiced woodworking, blacksmithing, or weaving, depending on family occupation. These months, while harsh, were a period of intense learning and apprenticeship, where practical knowledge was integrated seamlessly with everyday survival. Elders served as living repositories of wisdom, recounting not just tales but specific survival strategies for different winter scenarios, from extreme frost to failed crops. Psychological adaptation remained a crucial aspect of medieval winter life. The long nights and limited daylight posed risks of depression, lethargy, and anxiety. Villagers countered these effects through structured routines, communal engagement, and ritualistic behaviors. The repetition of daily tasks, combined with periodic festive events, created predictability, which in turn fostered a sense of control and stability. Storytelling, music, and games not only entertained, but also served as cognitive stimulation, reducing the mental strain imposed by isolation and monotony. Social cohesion was strengthened through these practices, as individuals depended on one another for both emotional and practical support. The role of architecture in winter life continued to be paramount. In addition to structural adaptations, interiors were meticulously organized to maximize warmth. Beds were arranged near stoves or hearths, storage chests were positioned to buffer drafts, and curtains or tapestries insulated walls. Wealthier households sometimes employed thick carpets and rugs, which trapped heat and provided cushioning against cold stone floors. Windows were small and often covered with oiled cloth or wooden shutters to minimize heat loss while allowing some light to enter. The interplay of structure, furniture placement, and insulation demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of microclimates within the home, knowledge born from centuries of observation and practical experimentation. Health and hygiene during winter were also vital considerations. Cold and damp conditions increased susceptibility to respiratory illnesses and joint ailments. Maintaining a warm, dry, and clean living space was essential. Clothes and bedding were aired near the hearth, floors were swept, and water for washing was carefully managed to prevent freezing. Herbs and simple medicinal preparations were used to treat minor ailments and maintain vitality during months when medical assistance was scarce. Diets rich in grains, preserved vegetables, and salted or smoked meats provided essential calories, while fermented foods offered a source of vitamins, particularly during extended periods when fresh produce was unavailable. Nutrition, sanitation, and warmth were deeply interconnected aspects of survival strategy. Medieval winter life was thus a complex interplay of human creativity, environmental adaptation, and social organization. The season shaped almost every aspect of daily existence, from architecture to clothing, from diet to leisure, from work routines to cultural rituals. Life in winter demanded foresight, discipline, and cooperation. Yet it was also a time of rich cultural expression, intellectual engagement, and intimate family interaction. The harshness of the climate imposed limits, but within those limits, communities found ways to thrive, creating spaces of warmth, security, and shared meaning. Survival was never simply a matter of enduring cold. It was a dynamic process of understanding, anticipating, and responding to an ever-changing environment. The scene closes with a sweeping view of the medieval landscape in midwinter. Snow blankets fields, forests, and villages. Smoke rises from chimneys, fires glow warmly within homes, and villagers move purposefully through snow-laden streets, carrying firewood, tending animals, and checking on neighbors. Music drifts faintly from a distant home, children's laughter echoes across frozen ponds, and elders confer quietly by hearths, planning the next day's work. The world is harsh, yet alive with human resilience, adaptation, and the subtle rhythms of survival. Winter in the medieval world was not only a season of cold and darkness, but also a defining period for the local economy, trade networks, and resource management. While survival and warmth were primary concerns for families and villages, the broader economic systems of the time were equally affected by the harsh climate. Markets slowed, rivers froze, and roads became treacherous, yet life and trade persisted, adapting to the constraints of frozen landscapes. Medieval economies were remarkably resilient, evolving intricate systems for sustaining commerce, distributing resources, and managing shortages during months when the land itself seemed inhospitable. The agricultural calendar was the backbone of medieval economic activity, and winter represented a pause, yet also a period of critical preparation. Grain stores, harvested during autumn, formed the basis of subsistence and trade. Wealthier households and monasteries often maintained substantial reserves of wheat, barley, oats, and rye, carefully stored in granaries that were raised above the ground to prevent moisture damage and rodent infestations. Peasant households relied on smaller caches, strategically divided into portions for daily use, seeds for spring planting, and surplus to trade or sell. The management of these resources was not arbitrary. Every sack, barrel, and bin was meticulously counted, rotated, and monitored, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of food preservation and long-term planning. Trade networks, both local and regional, were significantly influenced by winter conditions. Rivers, which had been vital conduits for transporting goods, often froze, disrupting trade routes and isolating communities. Roads, when passable at all, were hazardous, snow-covered, and muddy from thaw cycles. Yet merchants, innkeepers, and local artisans developed strategies to maintain economic activity. Inns and taverns became hubs of both rest and commerce for travelers who braved the elements, offering temporary shelter in exchange for goods or payment. Caravan routes were modified seasonally, relying on frozen rivers as natural highways or concentrating trade in more sheltered valleys and towns where snow accumulation was less severe. Markets in towns and villages were similarly adapted. Winter markets were less frequent, but carefully timed to coincide with feast days, festivals, or religious observances when villagers had both the time and the means to exchange goods. Food, especially preserved items like salted meats, smoked fish, dried vegetables, and grains dominated trade, but other goods, such as wool, furs, iron tools, and basic household items, were also essential for daily life. Local craftspeople, blacksmiths, coopers, weavers, and potters relied on these seasonal markets to sell their wares and obtain necessary supplies in return. The rhythm of trade shifted in response to weather and environmental conditions, demonstrating a remarkable flexibility in sustaining the local economy during challenging months. Food shortages were a constant threat in winter, particularly in regions prone to heavy snowfall, early frosts, or failed harvests. Villagers employed multiple strategies to mitigate scarcity. Preservation techniques, such as smoking, salting, and pickling, ensured a supply of protein and vegetables. Root cellars and insulated storage pits protected crops and fermented foods from freezing. Households carefully rationed portions, prioritizing children, the elderly, and essential workers who maintained firewood, animals, and other critical resources. In extreme cases, community granaries or charitable institutions, such as monasteries and guild halls, distributed supplies to those in dire need. The management of scarcity required foresight, discipline, and cooperation, as failure to plan could lead to hunger, illness, and mortality during the coldest months. Livestock management was also a critical component of winter survival and economic stability. Animals provided both sustenance and warmth, as described in earlier scenes, but their maintenance required careful attention. Cows, goats, pigs, and poultry had to be sheltered, fed, and protected from frostbite and disease. Winter forage, often stockpiled hay, straw, or stored grains, was rationed to ensure that animals survived until spring. Excess livestock might be slaughtered in late autumn or early winter to reduce consumption demands, providing salted or smoked meat for storage. In many cases, livestock themselves represented both economic assets and food reserves, highlighting the dual role of animals in survival and commerce. Household labor during winter shifted to accommodate economic and environmental pressures. Indoor crafts and repair work became central activities. Blacksmiths repaired tools and weapons, carpenters constructed or maintained furniture, and weavers produced textiles for clothing, blankets, and trade. Women managed food preparation, storage, and garment mending, ensuring that household infrastructure remained intact. Children assisted where possible, learning skills essential for future economic and survival roles. Every activity was framed by the reality of winter, conserving heat, optimizing light, and maintaining sufficient energy to endure long days of cold and work. Community cooperation extended beyond immediate households. Neighbors shared knowledge about resource management, coordinated the collection of firewood, and supported one another during extreme weather events. Villagers might collectively repair roofs damaged by snow or reinforce walls exposed to wind and frost. In towns, guilds played a similar role, ensuring that essential trades continued and that standards of quality and safety were maintained despite environmental challenges. Mutual dependence reinforced social cohesion and enhanced the resilience of the broader economy, demonstrating how human networks could mitigate the vulnerabilities imposed by winter. Cultural and religious practices also intersected with economic realities. Festivals, religious observances, and seasonal feasts were intertwined with economic activity, providing structured opportunities for trade, labor exchange, and social networking. These occasions often dictated the timing of larger purchases or the collection of rents and dues. Additionally, charitable practices, often organized through religious institutions, provided essential support for the most vulnerable, distributing food, clothing, and firewood. In effect, spiritual life and economic life were not separate, spheres but mutually reinforcing, systems that allowed communities to endure prolonged periods of hardship. Technological adaptation supported both survival and commerce. Improvements in storage design, heating methods, and transport logistics allowed communities to preserve goods longer, maintain warmth, and move resources efficiently despite frozen rivers and snow-blocked roads. Granaries were constructed with ventilation systems and elevated floors to prevent moisture damage. Hearths and stoves were engineered to maximize heat retention while minimizing fuel consumption. Simple yet effective tools facilitated woodcutting, ice breaking, and food processing, underscoring the practical ingenuity embedded in medieval winter life. Environmental knowledge was central to winter economy and survival. Villagers monitored weather patterns, snowfall, and ice conditions to plan travel, trade, and agricultural activities. Understanding the behavior of rivers, forests, and local wildlife informed hunting, wood gathering, and fishing strategies. These insights were passed orally across generations, supplemented by practical observation and integrated into the fabric of everyday life. Every decision, from when to harvest hay to how to stock granaries, from when to hunt to when to travel, was influenced by accumulated knowledge about seasonal cycles, local ecology, and climatic variability. Psychological resilience was closely tied to economic stability. Households and communities that maintained sufficient reserves, effective storage systems, and cooperative labor routines experienced lower stress levels during winter. Conversely, unprepared households faced heightened anxiety, scarcity, and risk. Social rituals, communal gatherings, and storytelling all served to bolster morale, reinforcing the sense of shared purpose and reducing the psychological burden of scarcity and isolation. The interplay between economic prudence, social cohesion, and psychological well-being highlights the complexity and sophistication of medieval winter life. The scene concludes with a sweeping panorama of a medieval village deep in winter. Smoke rises from chimneys, markets bustle briefly in sheltered spaces, and villagers carry essential goods through snow-laden streets. Granaries, barns, and workshops form the backbone of survival, while communal gatherings ensure that knowledge, resources, and labor are shared. In this frozen landscape, life is not merely endured, it is carefully managed, adapted, and sustained through a complex web of human ingenuity, cooperation, and foresight. The interplay of survival, economy, and culture reflects a profound understanding of the natural world and a remarkable capacity to turn adversity into a structured, manageable, and ultimately survivable way of life. In this frozen tableau, medieval people reveal their extraordinary capacity to transform adversity into opportunity, darkness into warmth, and isolation into community, a testament to the enduring strength of human ingenuity, culture, and spirit. The midwinter landscape of northern Europe, blanketed in thick snow and encased in frost, was not merely a challenge for survival and domestic life. It was also a season of heightened vulnerability. Villages, isolated by frozen rivers and snow-clogged roads, faced threats from both the natural environment and human conflict. Bandits, rival lords, or marauding armies could exploit the difficulty of travel and the scarcity of resources to launch raids. Consequently, medieval communities had to develop layered strategies for defense, integrating architecture, social organization, and adaptive winter tactics into a comprehensive survival framework. The winter, in this context, was both an adversary and an amplifier of pre-existing dangers, demanding vigilance, preparation, and ingenuity from every member of the village. Architecture played a central role in medieval winter defense. While homes were designed for warmth and daily survival, they also functioned as fortifications against potential human threats. In peasant villages, houses were tightly clustered, forming narrow lanes that were easier to defend and monitor. Fences, ditches, and wooden palisades were erected around perimeters, creating buffer zones that could delay or deter intruders. In wealthier settlements, manor houses and fortified keeps featured thick stone walls, arrow slits, and watchtowers. The snow and ice, while hindering travel, also provided natural obstacles. Frozen rivers could act as moats. Snowdrifts could conceal defensive spikes or traps, and ice-covered terrain could be used strategically to slow the approach of attackers. The design of these structures reflects a dual-purpose philosophy: shelter from both the elements and hostile forces. Village organization extended these architectural strategies into social structures. Every able-bodied villager had an assigned role in winter defense, from lookout duties atop rooftops or towers to coordinating communal patrols through snow-laden fields. Signals, often using horns, bells, or fires, were standardized to alert the community of danger. The hierarchy of responsibility was clear. Village elders or appointed leaders coordinated defensive efforts, while younger men and boys assisted in maintaining watchposts, repairing fortifications, or patrolling boundaries. Women and children, while less directly involved in armed defense, played crucial roles by managing supplies, tending to livestock, and preparing food to sustain defenders. This level of coordination highlights the interdependence of social roles in ensuring both physical security and communal cohesion. Winter warfare posed unique challenges. Armies or raiding parties moving through deep snow were slowed, their mobility constrained by icy rivers, hidden crevasses, and freezing winds. Villagers exploited these limitations, setting traps, camouflaging stockpiles, and using knowledge of local terrain to their advantage. Snow could be shoveled into defensive berms, creating elevated platforms for archers or lookouts. Frozen streams could be used to funnel attackers into narrow approaches, where defenders could concentrate their limited manpower. Even seemingly mundane objects, firewood piles, carts, and haystacks, could be strategically positioned to impede or confuse invaders. The winter, in essence, became an ally to those who understood its subtleties, turning environmental hardship into tactical advantage. Communication within the village was a critical element of defensive strategy. Signals had to travel across snow-covered lanes, icy fields, and partially frozen rivers. Towers and high points were used to observe distant movement, while fires, smoke, and horns transmitted warnings quickly to the community. Messengers, familiar with shortcuts, hidden paths, and safe routes, relayed instructions from elders or local leaders to isolated parts of the village. The effectiveness of these communications could determine the success of a defensive maneuver or the survival of the entire settlement. Even in the harshest blizzards, these systems were maintained, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of risk management and collective responsibility. Supply management was equally vital for both defense and survival. During winter, the preparation of food, water, and firewood had to account not only for the daily needs of villagers, but also for the possibility of sieges or raids. Granaries were stocked strategically, with certain reserves earmarked for defenders. Underground cellars and insulated storage pits were fortified to prevent both spoilage and theft. Firewood was divided into defensive stockpiles, ensuring that essential heat sources could be maintained during prolonged engagements. Every resource, from grains to blankets, had dual functions: sustenance for survival and strategic assets in the event of external threats. Training and readiness were continuous processes. Even in the stillness of winter, villagers practiced drills, maintained weapons, and ensured that every defensive mechanism remained functional. Archers practiced with bows despite frigid fingers, ensuring proficiency under harsh conditions. Spears, axes, and improvised weapons were checked, repaired, and positioned near entry points. Defensive techniques were taught orally, passed down from elders who had survived previous raids or sieges. This perpetual cycle of preparation reflects a cultural understanding that winter, while a period of apparent dormancy, was also a time when human threats could exploit environmental constraints. Alliances and local networks extended the reach of winter defense. Neighboring villages often coordinated patrols, shared intelligence about potential raiders, and arranged mutual aid agreements. Trade networks, while slowed by frozen rivers and snow, facilitated access to essential goods that could sustain both economic stability and defensive readiness. Monasteries and religious institutions occasionally provided refuge, food, or logistical support, reinforcing the interdependence of community institutions during the harshest months. These networks exemplify how medieval societies leveraged both social cohesion and practical collaboration to mitigate the compounded threats of winter and human conflict. Psychological resilience was tested more than ever during these months. The dual pressures of environmental hardship and potential human aggression required constant vigilance and mental fortitude. Storytelling, music, and ritual, already crucial in domestic winter life, now took on added significance as mechanisms for maintaining morale among defenders. Seasonal festivals and religious observances provided not only respite, but also reaffirmed a sense of purpose and divine protection. The mental strategies of medieval communities, structured routines, shared responsibility, and cultural reinforcement were inseparable from their physical defense mechanisms, forming an integrated survival system. Medical knowledge, though rudimentary by modern standards, played a role in preparing for winter defense. Injuries sustained during patrolling, woodcutting, or conflict required immediate attention. Herbal remedies, poultices, and basic surgical techniques were applied by knowledgeable members of the community. Cold exposure, frostbite, and respiratory illnesses were common. And preventative measures, insulating clothing, warm bedding, and regular nourishment were emphasized to maintain both combat readiness and general health. The integration of medical, environmental, and tactical knowledge highlights the holistic approach of medieval winter survival. The scene concludes with a vivid tableau: a snowbound village at twilight, roofs heavy with snow, smoke rising from chimneys, and defenders patrolling icy lanes. Torches flicker along the wooden palisades while archers scan the surrounding frozen fields. Inside homes, families maintain warmth and prepare meals, aware that the safety of the village depends on the vigilance of each member. Despite the darkness, the cold, and the ever-present threats from both nature and man, the medieval community endures. Their resilience, cooperation, and strategic foresight transform winter from a season of vulnerability into a period of disciplined survival, proving that even in the harshest conditions, human ingenuity and social cohesion can turn adversity into a manageable and sometimes even controlled challenge. As the frost deepened and the days remained shrouded in mist and early darkness, medieval villages entered a period of intense domestic activity and cultural preservation. Winter, though harsh and unforgiving, provided a unique space for people to cultivate skills, pass down traditions, and maintain the intricate web of knowledge necessary for survival. While the surrounding landscape seemed static, frozen rivers, snow-covered fields, and bare forests, the interiors of homes and communal spaces were alive with purposeful labor, creativity, and the subtle rhythms of cultural continuity. Craftsmanship took center stage during the cold months. With outdoor labor largely curtailed by snow, villagers turned inward, dedicating their energies to the production and maintenance of essential items. Blacksmiths repaired tools, sharpened weapons, and forged new implements in the steady glow of their forges. Every hammer strike, measured with precision, produced tools that would be crucial not only for spring planting, but also for everyday survival. Axes for firewood, sickles for crop harvest, plows for soil preparation, and nails for construction, all required careful crafting, as mistakes could prove costly in the months to come. The forge was also a social hub. Apprentices learned from experienced smiths, absorbing both practical techniques and the stories that contextualize their craft. Through these shared spaces, knowledge flowed across generations, ensuring continuity and mastery. Woodworking was another essential winter craft. Carpenters created furniture, repaired roof beams, and constructed storage chests to protect food and valuables from snow, ice, and rodents. Every plank, joint, and peg was carefully measured and executed, reflecting a deep understanding of materials, structural dynamics, and long-term durability. Tools were maintained meticulously, as the scarcity of replacements during winter demanded efficient use. Beyond practical purposes, some wooden items also bore symbolic or decorative designs. Carved motifs on chests, benches, and doors often depicted religious symbols, family crests, or protective emblems believed to safeguard the household. This fusion of utility and symbolism reflects a medieval worldview in which daily labor was intertwined with spiritual and cultural life. Textile work dominated domestic spaces. Women and children spent hours spinning wool, weaving cloth, and sewing garments or blankets. Knitting, though not widespread in all regions, was practiced where materials permitted, producing warm socks, gloves, and caps vital for enduring the cold. Furs, sourced from livestock or hunting, were cleaned, prepared, and incorporated into clothing or bedding. Dyeing techniques, though limited by available natural resources, allowed for both practical differentiation of garments and aesthetic expression. This meticulous craftwork was not mere pastime. It was central to survival, ensuring that every household member remained insulated, mobile, and able to perform essential tasks outdoors. Children, apprenticed in these skills from an early age, absorbed both technical knowledge and social norms, preparing them for future responsibility. Oral storytelling and performance were deeply woven into winter life. Long nights by the hearth offered the ideal setting for tales of heroism, cunning, moral instruction, and communal history. Elders recounted previous winters, notable storms, harvest failures, or encounters with bandits, embedding practical lessons within narrative structures. These stories also reinforced social cohesion, reminding listeners of shared values, history, and expectations. Ballads, songs, and chants complemented storytelling, often accompanied by simple instruments or rhythmic clapping. Through repetition and performance, cultural memory was preserved and transmitted, ensuring that collective knowledge was maintained even in isolated or harsh conditions. Children absorbed these traditions not merely as entertainment, but as essential cultural and survival education. Religious practices intersected with crafts and storytelling, further strengthening cultural continuity. Winter feasts and Saints' Day observances involved the creation of candles, decorations, and ritual implements. Homes were adorned with greenery, symbolic objects, and crafted tokens that served both aesthetic and spiritual purposes. Food preparation for these occasions involved complex processes. Dough was kneaded and shaped, meat was smoked or cured, and fermented foods were meticulously monitored. These domestic rituals reinforced communal rhythms, connecting individual households to broader cultural and religious networks. Even in extreme cold, these observances provided structure, meaning, and a sense of purpose, counterbalancing the monotony and hardship of frozen landscapes. Knowledge preservation extended beyond immediate household skills. Elders taught children practical survival strategies, fire management, food storage, clothing maintenance, and navigation of snowy terrain, while embedding these lessons within stories and allegories. This dual mode of instruction, combining narrative and demonstration, ensured retention and engagement. Skill transmission was both deliberate and immersive. Children observed, practiced under supervision, and eventually contributed meaningfully to household tasks. This apprenticeship model, reinforced by repetition and social expectation, guaranteed that each generation was equipped to navigate both environmental and societal challenges effectively. Social gatherings, even during severe winter, maintained this transmission of knowledge. Communal gatherings for work, festivals, or defense were also opportunities to exchange techniques, trade surplus materials, and collectively solve practical problems. Neighbors shared seeds, repaired tools, and collaborated on large-scale tasks such as timber cutting, hay distribution, and barn repairs. The mutual dependence cultivated in these months strengthened communal bonds, ensuring that skills, resources, and cultural knowledge were collectively maintained. In essence, winter fostered a rhythm of interdependence, where survival and cultural continuity were inseparable. Artistic expression, though constrained by materials and climate, flourished within these domestic and communal spaces. Carvings, embroidery, and painting, though modest compared to the illuminated manuscripts of wealthier institutions, provided both aesthetic satisfaction and cultural reinforcement. These expressions often carried symbolic meanings. Protective symbols etched into doors, embroidered motifs on garments, or painted icons within simple homes acted as both spiritual guardians and cultural markers. The intertwining of survival, utility, and symbolic meaning underscores the medieval approach to winter life. No activity was trivial, and every task carried multiple layers of significance. Environmental adaptation remained central. Villagers used the natural properties of their surroundings to optimize craft and domestic work. Snow provided insulation for stored items, while frozen rivers served as both transport routes and natural refrigeration. Animal hides and furs were prepared and stored to maintain pliability, and timber was seasoned and dried within heated indoor spaces to prevent cracking. Even the orientation of windows, doors, and workspaces was planned to maximize daylight and minimize exposure to cold winds. Such attention to detail reflects a sophisticated understanding of microenvironments and seasonal cycles, ensuring that labor was both efficient and effective. Economic considerations influenced winter craft and skill maintenance. Materials were scarce and valuable. Waste was avoided rigorously. Wool, wood, metal, and furs were carefully allocated to tasks with the highest practical or symbolic value. Surplus materials might be exchanged or sold at winter markets, reinforcing both household economies and local trade networks. This deliberate management of resources, combined with skillful labor, ensured that every household maintained resilience despite environmental scarcity. Craftsmanship was thus inseparable from survival, economy, and social standing. The scene concludes with an intimate vision of a village night. Snow blankets rooftops and fields, while the soft glow of fires illuminates interiors where families are absorbed in craft, storytelling, and ritual. A blacksmith hammers rhythmically, sparks dancing in the cold air. Children sit cross-legged, learning to spin wool or carve simple tools. Elders recount tales that intertwine moral lessons with practical knowledge, while women prepare garments, blankets, and food. Outside, faint silhouettes move along snow-laden paths, tending to animals or checking firewood supplies. The village, though encased in frost and darkness, thrives with purposeful activity, cultural continuity, and communal interdependence. In this frozen landscape, every task, story, and ritual embodies resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring spirit of medieval life. winter had fully entrenched itself in the medieval northern European landscape. Snow-blanketed fields and forests, rivers froze into solid ribbons of ice, and daylight was scarce, cutting the hours available for labor and movement. For medieval communities, survival during this time was not simply a matter of endurance within the home. It required continuous engagement with the environment to procure food, maintain livestock, and strategically allocate resources. Hunting, ice fishing, and foraging were not merely seasonal pastimes, but essential lifelines, demanding skill, knowledge, and careful coordination. Hunting during the cold months was particularly critical. Deep snow transformed the landscape, both hindering movement and shaping animal behavior in ways that could be leveraged by skilled hunters. Deer, boar, and smaller game followed specific patterns, seeking shelter from the wind, grazing near unplowed fields, or congregating around streams and rivers. Knowledge of these habits, accumulated over generations, was indispensable. Hunters observed tracks, recognized the signs of feeding areas, and anticipated migration paths. Simple but effective tools, such as bows, spears, snares, and traps, were employed strategically. Snow itself could be used to conceal movement, guide animals toward traps, or provide natural camouflage for hunters lying in wait. Community cooperation enhanced hunting success. Larger game often required coordinated efforts. Groups of hunters would form drives, pushing animals toward predetermined kill zones where others waited. Knowledge was shared openly among families and clans, ensuring that no household suffered from scarcity while others had surplus. Hunting was also regulated culturally. Certain seasons, animals, and territories were respected to maintain sustainable populations and preserve ecological balance. This combination of skill, observation, coordination, and ethical practice reflected a sophisticated understanding of the winter ecosystem. Ice fishing emerged as another critical component of winter food procurement. Frozen rivers, lakes, and ponds became sources of sustenance that were otherwise inaccessible. Villagers drilled holes through thick ice using augers or hand tools, dropping lines baited with fish such as pike, perch, or trout. Knowledge of underwater currents, fish behavior, and ice stability was essential. One wrong step could lead to disaster. A thin patch of ice could collapse under a fisherman's weight, exposing him to hypothermia or drowning. Successful ice fishing required patience, observation, and precision, often practiced by the same families year after year, who passed on detailed knowledge through oral instruction. The act of fishing itself was both laborious and meditative, combining sustenance with the rhythms of seasonal adaptation. Foraging, though constrained by snow cover, continued to supplement food reserves. Certain root vegetables, nuts, and berries could be retrieved beneath the snow or in sheltered areas. Mushrooms and herbs, critical for both culinary and medicinal purposes, were sometimes stored from autumn or cultivated in rudimentary greenhouses or indoor beds. Honey, collected and stored in summer, became a precious source of calories and a vital ingredient for cooking or preserving other foods. Every available resource was integrated into a larger system of food management, reflecting meticulous foresight and practical ingenuity. Resource allocation during winter was a precise art. Families divided stores of grains, meat, preserved vegetables, and dairy products into daily rations, anticipating the duration of the coldest months and the potential for unforeseen shortages. Livestock were fed selectively, prioritizing survival of the most productive animals, while surplus or weaker animals were occasionally slaughtered to provide fresh meat. Households balanced caloric needs, fuel availability, and labor demands, creating systems that minimized waste and maximized efficiency. Even minor miscalculations could have cascading consequences, highlighting the critical importance of planning, observation, and adaptive strategy. Trade networks also intersected with hunting and foraging practices. Preserved meat, smoked fish, dried vegetables, and other staples could be exchanged in local markets or with neighboring villages, allowing for redistribution of resources. Traders who specialized in winter transport understood the challenges of frozen rivers, snowbound roads, and unpredictable weather. Inns and taverns acted as nodes where knowledge, goods, and labor were exchanged, maintaining economic circulation even in months when natural obstacles seemed insurmountable. These interactions strengthened communal resilience, ensuring that survival was not merely an individual endeavor, but a coordinated effort across networks. Skill transmission was crucial during this period. Hunting, fishing, foraging, and resource management were taught through apprenticeship within families. Children and adolescents accompanied elders on hunts, learning to identify animal tracks, recognize ice thickness, and manage tools safely. Mistakes were instructive. Failure in hunting or fishing offered practical lessons in timing, technique, and environmental awareness. This immersive education ensured that each generation retained the cumulative wisdom necessary for survival. Oral tradition was central. Elders recounted past winters, extreme weather events, and successful strategies, embedding practical advice within compelling narratives that reinforced both knowledge and social cohesion. Weather and environmental monitoring were deeply integrated into all food procurement activities. Snow depth, frost cycles, and river ice thickness determined not only hunting and fishing schedules, but also routes for travel and trade. Villagers were keenly observant of natural signs, bird migration patterns, animal footprints, wind direction, and cloud formations. Understanding subtle changes allowed communities to anticipate challenges, adjust labor schedules, and optimize survival strategies. These insights, accumulated over generations, reflected a sophisticated ecological intelligence embedded in daily life. Even domestic life was intertwined with these external activities. Food processing, storage, and preparation were coordinated with hunting and fishing schedules. Meat from hunts was smoked, salted, or cured immediately. Fish from ice holes were cleaned and dried or preserved. Root vegetables, grains, and dairy products were stored in cellars or insulated pits, ensuring longevity. Each household functioned as a microcosm of resource management, integrating environmental knowledge, physical labor, and cultural practice into a coherent system of winter survival. Social cohesion was reinforced through these activities. Hunting and ice fishing were communal, involving coordination, shared labor, and collective decision-making. Resource allocation often involved negotiation and compromise, with emphasis on equity, sustainability, and mutual benefit. Seasonal festivals, rituals, and communal feasts punctuated periods of intense labor, providing relief, celebration, and reinforcement of social norms. These moments were not mere leisure. They were essential mechanisms for maintaining morale, cohesion, and shared identity in the face of the isolating and taxing winter months. Defensive considerations intersected with hunting and resource management. Villagers maintained watch over territory, not only to protect stored food from human raiders, but also to prevent predation by wild animals emboldened by scarcity. Dogs, used both for hunting and guarding, were integral to this system, alerting households to danger and assisting in controlling game. Fortified storage areas, sometimes within palisades or stone cellars, safeguarded critical reserves. Ice-covered terrain, while offering opportunities for transportation and resource collection, also required vigilance to prevent accidents and to maintain strategic defensive positions. The scene concludes with a panoramic image of a winter morning in a medieval village. Smoke rises from chimneys, signaling the first fires of the day. Hunters set out along snow-covered tracks, carrying bows, spears, and supplies, while fishers carefully approach frozen rivers and lakes. Children observe from the safety of hearth-warmed homes, learning the rhythms of winter survival. Women prepare and ration food, check on livestock, and maintain household warmth. Elders oversee activity, ensuring that knowledge is transmitted and decisions are coordinated across the village. Every action is purposeful, every movement measured, reflecting the deep integration of environmental awareness, cultural knowledge, and practical skill. In this frozen landscape, survival is a continuous, dynamic process where ingenuity, foresight, and cooperation allow medieval communities not only to endure, but to thrive despite adversity. As the snow accumulated and icy winds swept relentlessly across the medieval countryside, village life retreated into the warmth of homes, halls, and communal spaces. Winter, while harsh and demanding, was not a season of mere dormancy. It was a period of intense social, cultural, and intellectual engagement. The darkened days and long nights shaped the rhythm of daily life, fostering indoor activity, communal celebration, and the preservation of traditions. In the midst of scarcity and cold, people found ways to sustain mental resilience, maintain social cohesion, and celebrate the enduring patterns of their culture, creating a unique blend of survival, festivity, and continuity. The hearth was the center of winter social life, a source of warmth and a focal point for gathering. Families, neighbors, and even traveling guests would congregate around its fire, drawing both physical comfort and psychological security. Children, who might have spent summer days laboring in the fields, were now free to observe, learn, and participate in indoor crafts, storytelling, and games. Women managed the domestic sphere, spinning wool, weaving textiles, and preparing meals, while simultaneously facilitating conversation, teaching skills, and maintaining household order. Men, when not engaged in hunting, wood collection, or other survival tasks, contributed to indoor activities such as tool maintenance, woodworking, and minor repairs. The hearth functioned as the locus for both practical survival and social interaction, bridging the necessities of life with the emotional needs of the community. Festivals and religious observances punctuated the rhythm of winter, transforming darkness and scarcity into periods of collective joy and meaning. Celebrations such as Yule, Christmas, Epiphany, and various saints' days were observed with meticulous attention to ritual, music, food, and storytelling. Communities planned feasts, prepared preserved foods in abundance, and organized gatherings that brought together neighbors who might otherwise remain isolated by snow and ice. These festivals were not simply leisure. They reinforced social networks, established a sense of rhythm in otherwise monotonous months, and provided a shared narrative of culture, faith, and survival. Music, whether sung or played on simple instruments like flutes, lutes, drums, or rattles, accompanied these events, creating a sensory environment that reinforced emotional resilience and communal bonds. Storytelling was both entertainment and education. Elders recounted tales that blended historical events, moral lessons, and practical advice, ensuring that knowledge and culture were transmitted in an engaging and memorable manner. Stories of heroic figures, cunning animals, or divine intervention offered guidance on how to navigate challenges, from harsh weather to interpersonal conflict. Children absorbed these narratives alongside practical instruction, learning to read the cues of the natural world, recognize seasonal changes, and understand social expectations. Oral tradition served as a living library, preserving the collective memory of the community while simultaneously reinforcing cohesion, identity, and continuity. Indoor games and activities were designed to stimulate both mind and body within the constraints of limited space. Children played with carved wooden toys, balls of tightly bound fabric, or simple board games, honing coordination, strategy, and cooperation. Adults engaged in music, dance, and storytelling contests, while collaborative crafting projects such as weaving, quilting, or the creation of decorative items provided both practical outputs and opportunities for interaction. These activities maintained morale, mitigated the mental strain of confinement, and fostered intergenerational engagement. In essence, the interior spaces of medieval homes became microcosms of education, entertainment, and social stability. Food preparation and communal eating reinforced both nutrition and social cohesion. Meals were carefully planned, integrating stored grains, preserved vegetables, salted or smoked meats, and dairy products into balanced portions. Cooking was often performed communally, with women and older children working together to prepare food in large cauldrons or ovens, while men ensured that fires remained stoked and supplies accessible. Feasts associated with festivals required advanced preparation, from bread baking to meat curing, ensuring that special occasions were marked by abundance despite the limitations imposed by the season. Shared meals reinforced relationships, established social hierarchies, and provided moments of reflection and celebration within the constraints of winter survival. Music and singing were interwoven with storytelling, domestic labor, and ritual practice. Rhythmic songs accompanied spinning, weaving, and other repetitive tasks, maintaining productivity while alleviating monotony. Instrumental music, often simple but expressive, provided entertainment and ceremonial accompaniment during religious observances or communal gatherings. Vocal music, from hymnody to ballads recounting local legends, allowed communities to reinforce memory, teach lessons, and celebrate shared values. The auditory environment of winter homes and halls was therefore rich, patterned, and purposeful, sustaining both emotional and cultural life. Religious devotion continued to structure the daily routine. Prayers, blessings, and simple rituals provided a sense of continuity and divine oversight during periods of scarcity, cold, and uncertainty. Households maintained small altars or icons, often adorned with greenery or crafted tokens, serving as focal points for reflection, protection, and moral reinforcement. The rhythm of devotion, morning and evening prayers, observances on feast days, and ritualized preparation of food and household tasks offered predictability, comfort, and a framework for ethical and social behavior. Faith in this context was both spiritual guidance and practical support for resilience, reinforcing the interplay between belief, daily life, and community cohesion. Environmental adaptation continued to shape social activity. Limited daylight and deep snow influenced the timing of gatherings, work, and travel. Villagers scheduled hunting, foraging, and other excursions to maximize efficiency and safety, while indoor spaces were arranged to conserve heat, maximize available light, and allow multiple activities simultaneously. Hearth placement, window orientation, and furniture arrangement were carefully considered, ensuring that homes functioned optimally as centers of warmth, labor, and social interaction. Even decorative or symbolic elements, such as tapestries, curtains, or carved motifs, were positioned to insulate, redirect airflow, or provide psychological comfort during the long months of isolation. Education and skill development were woven into every aspect of winter life. Apprenticeship within households and guilds ensured that practical knowledge, craftsmanship, resource management, animal husbandry, and domestic arts was transmitted effectively. Children learned through observation, guided practice, and participation in communal projects, integrating theory and hands-on experience. Elders and experienced practitioners monitored progress, offering corrections, explanations, and narratives that contextualized technical knowledge. The winter months, therefore, were a period of concentrated learning and reinforcement, preparing younger generations for both survival and economic productivity in the months to come. Mental resilience was cultivated deliberately through structured routines, social engagement, ritual observance, and cultural practices. Long nights and cold, confining weather could produce anxiety, depression, or lethargy, but the integration of social, cultural, and practical activities mitigated these risks. Work, play, storytelling, and ritual provided rhythm, purpose, and variety, reinforcing individual and communal confidence. Festivals, music, and shared meals punctuated the repetitive tasks of daily survival, creating psychological relief and reinforcing hope for the coming spring. The medieval approach to winter life recognized that mental fortitude was inseparable from physical and social survival, embedding resilience into every activity and interaction. Economic and social interdependence was reinforced by winter activities. Neighboring households collaborated on labor-intensive projects such as firewood collection, hay distribution, or repair of communal structures. Markets, though less frequent, served as hubs for exchanging surplus goods, acquiring materials, and sustaining social networks. Guilds maintained craft standards, coordinated training, and ensured continuity of essential trades despite seasonal constraints. The interweaving of domestic, communal, and economic activities ensured that even isolated villages maintained resilience, cohesion, and continuity of practice. The scene concludes with a vivid depiction of a winter evening. Snow blankets the village and surrounding forests, muted by the fading light of day. Smoke curls from chimneys, signaling warmth and activity within homes and halls. Inside, families gather around hearths. Children listen intently to stories. Women spin and weave. Men maintain tools and discuss plans for the morrow. Music and singing echo softly, punctuating the rhythm of domestic life. Festive decorations and small tokens of religious devotion imbue spaces with meaning and comfort. Beyond the hearth, snow-covered paths are patrolled, animals are tended, and essential supplies are monitored. Winter transformed the medieval landscape into a formidable challenge for mobility and trade. Snow-covered fields, frozen rivers, and icy roads constrained travel, often isolating villages from one another for weeks or even months. Yet despite these harsh conditions, medieval communities and merchants displayed remarkable ingenuity, maintaining transportation, trade, and communication networks through adaptive strategies that balanced risk, efficiency, and survival. The frozen world imposed limitations, but it also offered opportunities. Frozen rivers became highways. Snowbound roads demanded specialized skills and equipment, and communities leveraged environmental knowledge to sustain essential movement of goods and people. The first and most critical adaptation was the use of natural features as transportation corridors. Frozen rivers, canals, and lakes were not obstacles, but vital arteries for trade and communication. When ice was thick enough, merchants and villagers used sleds, carts, and occasionally simple rafts to transport goods across these surfaces. Knowledge of ice thickness, current patterns, and seasonal thawing cycles was indispensable. Villagers recognized weak points, cracks, or areas prone to sudden melting, ensuring that crossings were conducted safely. In many regions, rivers had become predictable transport routes over generations, and local expertise determined the timing, load limits, and direction of travel. The frozen water surfaces, while perilous, offered faster and more direct routes than snowbound and muddy roads. Snow-covered roads required specialized ingenuity. Carriages and carts, often fitted with metal runners or reinforced wheels, could navigate packed snow or ice. Horses and oxen were essential for pulling loads, but their use was optimized with knowledge of footing, stamina, and the availability of forage. In deeper snow, sledges were preferred, gliding over the surface and reducing the effort required from animals. Travelers coordinated departures to maximize daylight, avoid storms, and synchronize with other caravans. Inns and way stations along the routes provided shelter, food, and opportunities to repair equipment, forming critical nodes in a larger logistical network. These innovations reflected not only technological adaptation, but also social organization, as cooperation and shared knowledge determined the safety and success of winter transport. Merchants faced unique challenges in maintaining trade. Goods had to be preserved against the cold, moisture, and shifting environmental conditions. Grains, salted meats, furs, and textiles required careful packing to prevent spoilage or damage. Precious cargo, such as spices, iron tools, or religious items, demanded additional vigilance. Caravan leaders planned meticulously, calculating load distribution, travel times, and contingency routes in case of blocked paths. Partnerships between merchants and local villagers were common. Villagers offered guidance, labor, and shelter, while merchants provided goods, currency, and information. Trade was not only an economic activity, but also a social and logistical system that intertwined multiple layers of medieval life. Communication depended heavily on these transportation networks. Messages, tax records, and official edicts had to travel despite frozen or snowbound landscapes. Couriers on horseback or foot, familiar with local shortcuts and hazards, ensured the transmission of information. Relay points at inns, monasteries, and manor houses facilitated continuity, providing rest, food, and temporary shelter. Signals, such as fire beacons or horns, supplemented written and verbal communication in emergencies. This complex system demonstrated a high level of coordination, trust, and spatial awareness, ensuring that even isolated communities remained connected to broader political, economic, and social structures. Winter logistics extended to supply chain management. Villagers had to plan months in advance, anticipating shortages, storms, and transportation delays. Grain, hay, firewood, and other essentials were stockpiled strategically. Merchants synchronized shipments with seasonal labor availability and environmental conditions, ensuring that goods reached markets and households before depletion. Strategic rationing, prioritized distribution, and communal cooperation were key principles. Households shared surplus resources, coordinated labor, and adjusted consumption according to environmental forecasts. This meticulous planning exemplified the medieval capacity for adaptive management under extreme conditions. Technological adaptation was also vital. Sleds, reinforced carts, snowshoes, and spiked shoes allowed humans and animals to navigate otherwise impassable terrain. Bridges over rivers were sometimes augmented with temporary snow and ice ramps, facilitating the movement of goods and people. Simple mechanical devices, like pulleys and hoists, were employed in loading and unloading cargo from sleds or carts. Blacksmiths, carpenters, and wheelwrights ensured that equipment remained functional, repairing damage caused by ice, frost, or overloading. These innovations, often developed locally, were crucial for sustaining trade and daily life in winter, reflecting a practical knowledge born from necessity and experience. Environmental observation was central to planning and execution. Villagers monitored snowfall, frost cycles, and weather patterns to determine safe travel times and viable routes. Understanding wind direction, snow compaction, and ice integrity allowed them to predict potential hazards. Experienced guides often led caravans, using their intimate knowledge of terrain, hidden paths, and seasonal cues. Young apprentices learned these skills through direct participation, ensuring that critical knowledge was passed from generation to generation. In a landscape dominated by winter's constraints, environmental literacy was as essential as any physical tool or piece of equipment. Communal labor and coordination enhanced winter transport. Villagers often assisted passing caravans, providing manpower to pull sleds, reinforce sledges, or guide animals across difficult terrain. Neighboring settlements collaborated to maintain key roads, clear snow, and repair bridges or causeways. Inns and communal spaces became multifunctional hubs for storage, repair, rest, and coordination. This interdependence underscored a fundamental principle of medieval life. Survival, commerce, and communication relied on networks of human cooperation as much as on individual skill or technological innovation. Economic continuity depended on these transportation and logistical adaptations. Markets, fairs, and trade hubs were supplied even during the coldest months, though schedules, scale, and routes were modified. Grain, salt, wool, and preserved foods formed the bulk of winter trade, supplemented by crafted goods, furs, and luxury items for those with means. Merchants carefully balanced risk and reward, assessing the dangers posed by storms, ice, and bandits against potential profits. Local communities, in turn, benefited from access to essential supplies, sustaining not only physical survival, but also the broader economy that connected villages, towns, and cities. Risk management was an integral part of winter transport. Travelers assessed ice thickness, snow depth, and the likelihood of sudden thaw or storm events. Contingency plans included alternate routes, emergency shelters, and coordination with local authorities or fellow travelers. Every journey was calculated with precision. Speed, load, and manpower were adjusted according to environmental conditions. In this way, survival, commerce, and communication were intertwined, with environmental knowledge, social cooperation, and practical skill forming a comprehensive system of winter logistics. Mental and social resilience were closely linked to transportation and trade activities. Successful movement of goods and people provided not only physical sustenance, but also psychological reassurance, reinforcing confidence, cohesion, and a sense of control over a harsh environment. Conversely, delays, accidents, or loss of supplies could heighten anxiety and stress, demonstrating the critical interplay between logistics, survival, and emotional well-being. Communities that coordinated effectively, shared knowledge, and maintained preparedness were better able to sustain both material and social stability throughout the winter months. The scene concludes with a panoramic view of a snowbound medieval landscape at dawn. Frozen rivers stretch like silver ribbons, reflecting the pale morning light. Caravans and sleds traverse icy surfaces cautiously, while villagers clear snow-laden paths, maintain bridges, and guide animals. Smoke rises from chimneys, signaling warmth and activity within homes, inns, and communal spaces. Markets are prepared with preserved goods, and merchants coordinate deliveries despite the frozen conditions. The village, though encased in ice and snow, thrives through coordination, ingenuity, and resilience, demonstrating the medieval capacity to adapt transportation, trade, and communication networks to the most demanding environmental conditions. Despite the harsh climate, the village thrives with purposeful activity, cultural engagement, and emotional resilience, exemplifying the medieval capacity to convert adversity into structured, meaningful, and survivable life. As the winter months dragged on, the medieval landscape remained a study in contrasts. Harsh, frozen expanses outside and warm, bustling activity within homes, workshops, and communal halls. Snow-blanketed fields and forests, rivers were encased in thick ice, and long nights tested the endurance, ingenuity, and resilience of human communities. Yet within these frozen months, villagers, merchants, hunters, and craftsmen displayed extraordinary adaptability, creating systems of survival, social cohesion, cultural continuity, and economic activity that allowed them not only to endure, but to thrive. Scene 10, the culmination of the long winter, brings together the threads of domestic life: economic ingenuity, environmental mastery, social cohesion, and cultural resilience, weaving them into a coherent narrative that celebrates the medieval human spirit. By late winter, households had endured weeks of cold, darkness, and scarcity, relying on stored food, insulated shelters, and carefully rationed firewood. Granaries and cellars, stocked in autumn, had been gradually consumed, with meticulous planning ensuring that supplies lasted until the final weeks of frost. Families had adapted to the constraints of limited daylight, using every hour of sunlight efficiently for essential tasks. Workshops and hearths were abuzz with indoor labor: weaving, spinning, mending clothing, sharpening tools, crafting furniture, and preparing food for both sustenance and preservation. Children, trained in the skills necessary for survival, assisted elders while absorbing the cultural knowledge embedded in stories, songs, and ritual observances. Hunting and fishing had continued throughout the season, with local knowledge proving critical to success. Frozen rivers were traversed with care, enabling ice fishing to supplement protein supplies. Snow-laden forests were scouted for deer, boar, and smaller game, while snares and traps captured fur-bearing animals, providing both sustenance and materials for clothing. Villagers had learned to anticipate animal movement, recognize tracks, and predict changes in behavior in response to snow, cold, and scarcity. These practices were essential not only for physical survival, but also for reinforcing skill transmission, social cooperation, and the psychological assurance that resources could be procured despite the challenges of winter. Winter trade, transportation, and communication had been maintained through adaptive strategies honed over generations. Frozen rivers and snowbound roads were leveraged for movement rather than avoided. Sleds and carts equipped with runners, reinforced wheels, and spiked shoes allowed goods and people to traverse icy terrain. Merchants coordinated with local guides, inns, and neighboring communities to ensure delivery of critical supplies. Markets and fairs, though reduced in scale, continued to function, enabling exchange of preserved foods, textiles, tools, and other essential goods. Couriers transmitted messages and official communications, while beacons, horns, and other signaling devices ensured that information flowed even under the most challenging conditions. These logistical adaptations reflected a sophisticated blend of environmental awareness, practical skill, and social cooperation. The social fabric of winter life had remained intact through careful orchestration of communal activities. Festivals, religious observances, and ritual gatherings punctuated the monotony of long nights and frozen landscapes. Yule, Christmas, and Saints' Days were observed with feasting, music, storytelling, and ceremony. Communal meals reinforced social hierarchies, trust networks, and reciprocity, while indoor activities such as spinning, weaving, carpentry, and blacksmithing maintained productivity and skill development. Oral storytelling remained central, blending history, practical instruction, moral guidance, and entertainment. Music, both instrumental and vocal, accompanied work and celebration, fostering emotional resilience and a sense of shared identity. As winter approached its final weeks, villagers began preparing for the coming spring. Stored seed stocks were carefully inspected, ensuring sufficient grains, legumes, and root vegetables for the planting season. Tools and equipment were repaired, sharpened, or replaced in anticipation of intensive agricultural labor. Livestock, having endured the cold with carefully rationed feed, were monitored for health and reproductive readiness. Villagers also prepared communal plots, cleared pathways, and organized labor schedules for the tasks that would resume with the thaw. These preparations reflected an understanding that survival was not merely a passive endurance of winter, but an active engagement in planning, repair, and anticipation of future challenges. The culmination of winter was also a moment of reflection on human resilience. Villagers assessed the effectiveness of storage, the success of hunting and fishing, and the outcomes of social coordination and economic exchange. Elders compared current conditions with those of past winters, offering insight and lessons learned. Young people internalized these observations, reinforcing intergenerational continuity of knowledge. Each household and community emerged from winter not simply as survivors, but as practitioners of a highly evolved system of adaptation, capable of responding to environmental, social, and economic challenges with ingenuity and cohesion. Cultural continuity was manifest in the integration of ritual, craft, and oral tradition into daily life. Every task, from mending clothing to preparing feasts, was embedded in patterns of meaning that reinforced identity, morality, and communal memory. Carvings, embroidered motifs, and decorative objects bore symbolic significance, serving as protective, commemorative, and educational tools. Music and storytelling maintained cultural literacy, while religious observances provided ethical guidance, psychological reassurance, and a framework for interpreting the cycles of nature. These cultural practices were not superfluous. They were essential components of survival, shaping behavior, reinforcing cooperation, and sustaining morale under extreme environmental stress. Economic, environmental, and social adaptation converged in a delicate balance of risk and opportunity. Villagers had learned to navigate frozen rivers and snowbound roads, trade with distant communities, and manage scarce resources with precision. Households coordinated labor, rationed food, and allocated supplies according to both necessity and fairness. Social hierarchies and cooperative networks ensured that knowledge, labor, and material resources were distributed efficiently. Environmental literacy, accumulated over generations, allowed villagers to anticipate threats, optimize routes, and exploit seasonal conditions. Winter, though formidable, became a period of controlled and manageable challenge rather than passive suffering. Mental resilience was cultivated through routine, ritual, social cohesion, and purposeful activity. Villagers coped with limited daylight, cold, and isolation through structured daily labor, communal gatherings, storytelling, music, and reflection. Emotional support was embedded in social networks. Neighbors assisted one another with firewood, livestock, and repair work. Festivals reinforced shared identity, and oral tradition transmitted both practical knowledge and moral guidance. These psychological strategies were inseparable from physical survival, ensuring that endurance was as much a product of the mind and social structure as it was of food, warmth, or shelter. As winter gradually yielded to the first hints of spring, the village began to awaken in anticipation of the planting season. Snow began to melt, rivers flowed freely, and paths became passable. Preparations intensified. Seed beds were readied, tools and carts were transported to fields, and livestock were guided to pastures. Markets reopened more fully, trade resumed at higher volume, and communal labor tasks shifted from indoor projects to agricultural work. The culmination of winter was thus both an ending and a transition, a testament to the cycles of nature, human adaptation, and the careful orchestration of life that allowed communities to endure and flourish. The final tableau of the story portrays a village emerging from winter's grip. Roofs glisten with melting snow, smoke rises from chimneys, and the first shoots of green appear in sheltered areas. Villagers move purposefully. Women carry baskets of seeds, men adjust plows and carts, and children follow, eager to observe and assist. Communal knowledge, skill, and culture are evident in every action, from the careful preservation of food stores to the repaired tools ready for field work. Hunting and fishing supplies, prepared over months of labor, are stored or redistributed. Songs, stories, and ritual observances punctuate work, reminding all of the shared heritage and collective endurance that have brought the village to this moment. Ultimately, the winter's challenges highlight a profound narrative of medieval human ingenuity, resilience, and interdependence. Communities navigated harsh climates, scarce resources, isolation, and social complexity through a combination of environmental knowledge, technological adaptation, communal cooperation, cultural continuity, and psychological fortitude. Their experiences underscore not only the hardships of medieval life, but also the remarkable capacity of human societies to structure survival into cohesive, meaningful, and enduring systems. Winter, with its frost, snow, and darkness, became both a crucible and a classroom, forging generations capable of adaptation, creativity, and resilience that resonated long after the snow melted.